From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Why no warning? A siren failure in the midst of a storm, just one of several recently across the state. Plus, questioning the governor's response to threatening letters with white powder sent to dozens of Kansas Republican lawmakers. But first, 9 Wichitans all asking for your vote to be the city's next mayor. The factors that will make a difference in this race. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Good evening, I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. And this is the year of the local election, with the race for mayor of Wichita taking top billing. It may not be making the headlines we saw last year with the governor's race, but as we all learned during the pandemic, the closer to home an elected position is, the more power that person has over your day-to-day life. This last week, PBS Kansas gathered 7 of the 9 candidates here at the KPTS studios for a debate sponsored by all of the Kansas Week news partners. As Cake's Nick Nelson shows us, it was an interesting evening.
The candidates addressed a wide range of issues at Thursday night's debate, including law enforcement reform, homelessness, and rising crime, particularly in the Old Town area. Wichita State Professor of Political Science Neil Allen says, however, it may be tough for voters to distinguish what changes the candidates would make.
Mayor Whipple did talk about mental health contributors to crime more than some of the other candidates did. But if you're looking for a different vision for the city of Wichita, you'd be hard-pressed to find something tonight.
Incumbent Mayor Brandon Whipple is facing re-election against 8 other candidates. Challenger Celeste Reset went after Whipple for having a super PAC run by his wife. Allen says if he makes it to the general election, this is an issue that may be front and center.
But the details were quite difficult to follow, and I expect if Whipple makes a runoff, we'll hear more about that in the fall.
And if you missed the debate and would like to see it in its entirety and hear from the actual candidates, 7 of them, we don't have time to put them all on the show today, check the PBS Kansas account on YouTube. Before you do that, though, let's break down some of what we're hearing. Here to do that, we've got, by Zoom, State Representative Ken Rajas, an agro-Republican, and on set with me, Dr. Jay Steinmetz, a political scientist from Fort Hays State University, and Senator Aletha Faust-Godot, a Wichita Democrat. Thank you all for joining me, and Aletha, it's your city. I'm going to start with you. What a race.
I'm telling you, Pilar, and thank you for having me on the show. I can't ever remember since I've been voting this many people in a mayor's race. 9 people, wow.
Yeah. Now, at one point, we were digging through some historical records. At one point, the city of Wichita actually did have 16 candidates one year, and they had to put them on like bleachers to hear from all of them.
Wow.
But it took us an hour and a half at the debate just to get through about 4 or 5 questions, I think it was. It wasn't very many questions.
Yeah, this past Sunday on July 16th, I was able to go to one of the debates and wow, it was exciting. They were all still, standing their ground. And I learned a lot from them, and I am not going to call who will advance to the general election, but I think we got to start looking at ranked voting to eliminate or to select candidates. But I'm like, wow, it's going to be a nail-biting process on election night.
This would certainly be a situation that would play into ranked voting pretty well.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's extraordinary to have 7 or 9 candidates. That's a baseball lineup right there. And, it certainly is something to look at, ranked voting, because it allows for a greater plurality of candidates to get some kind of at least preference from the voters revealed. And so I think it's a good sign in terms of our democracy that we have local elections where we have so many different candidates. I do want to call attention to Professor Neil Allen's comment there too in terms of policy. Is there a lot of distinctive policy differences with this lineup? Not so much. I'd love to see maybe some more contrast in terms of actual policy, in terms of actual vision, but it's great to see so many candidates in a local election.
Absolutely.
It's a good sign for democracy.
And Ken, I'm going to bring you in on this conversation as well. I know you, like Jay, are kind of from out of the Wichita metro area, but a lot of the issues they were talking about in that debate were ones that we're hearing across the state: law enforcement, crime, homelessness. These are issues, the fentanyl epidemic, that really touch all Kansans.
You're right, Pilar. And, even though I'm 4 hours away from Wichita, Wichita is the largest city in the state. And, as Wichita goes, so goes the state of Kansas. And we always look for strong leaders to come, from Wichita. So I think it's great that there's so many candidates that want to put their name in and give it a shot and let people see what their ideas are. Honestly, in today's world, we are so polarized. It is not surprising that there's not much difference in different philosophies of who wants to lead the state. You do have an incumbent in my former colleague, Mayor Whipple, and others, but I think we all have an interest. I mean, even though we may not get involved, may not be able to vote in the Wichita election, it is still important of who leads Wichita.
Most definitely. One thing that I took away from listening to that debate as I was sitting there watching the candidates respond to our questions was the one thing where they really got heated, where they deviated from their scripts and just started talking about, was when they started talking about funding and PACs and the power and where that money is coming from. Definitely a sore spot with several of the candidates.
Well, political fights are often very different than policy fights, right? And so in Ken's comment here, there's a great irony in our very polarized political era in America today, which is that we are very polarized. We've got left and right and not a lot in between. The public is very polarized. And yet if you look at the issues, if you look at actual policy, there's not as much disagreement and divergence as you would think there would be in such a polarized era. And so we often have political fights and political attacks without a lot of substantive nuts and bolts discussion about policy differences, because our policy differences, while there, I'm not saying we don't have policy differences, they're not as pronounced, they're not as sharply in relief as some of our politics might suggest. And so I'm not surprised that things get a little bit more heated when it comes to funding, when it comes to the political horse race, when it comes to the other things, because there's more substance to attack. There's more substance to try to shape some kind of difference. And every elected official knows that in electoral politics, in campaign politics, you have to find that edge that makes you different from your challengers.
Right, and I also see that when you talk about someone's family member, I think during the debate, when you mention a spouse's name or children's name, I think that's kind of crossing the line a little bit, though.
Yeah. Politics can get dirty, but it's a way to really put into sharp relief where you are as opposed to others. Americans don't like nepotism, right? Americans don't like the idea that you've got relatives that are cashing in on your name. It's an easy attack, and it's an attack that goes all the way up to national politics. Of course, you think about the Bidens, you think about the Trumps before, and so it's an attack that sticks. It's an attack that's used because it sticks.
But if you go and look at a lot of the current elected officials, a lot of them do have their spouses or a relative or someone close they can trust as their treasurer or PAC leader.
Yeah.
Well, and you're talking about how there's not as much difference when we're talking about policy, and that's something that we see when we talk with our lawmakers all the time. And Ken, I know you and I have talked about this as well, how predominantly most of what happens in Topeka is actually bipartisan.
Just about everything. There are certain issues, but really in order to be a successful legislator, I need to reach out to the aisle, our Sedgwick and Johnson County delegations. And so to find whatever a win-win is, or, I support them, they support me. And you're right. It's a lot of nuance. It's a lot of different things. But I think in the end, especially on our level, as well as state legislators, we truly do want what's best for all Kansans.
Right. Well, turning to state politics, the Speaker of the Kansas House has called out the governor for her public silence as someone mailed letters with a white powder to Republican lawmakers across the state. The State Finance Council recently approved spending $170,000 to cover the cost of deploying hazmat teams in Kansas to investigate anonymous letters with white powder mailed to about 100 state lawmakers. After that meeting, Speaker of the Kansas House, Wichita Representative Dan Hawkins made it clear he didn't like the governor's lack of a public comment on the letters. The Kansas Reflector quotes him as saying about Senate Minority Leader Dinah Sykes' statement, "I appreciate what she did. I sure wished I would have heard from our governor about that." The Reflector says Kelly has promised to issue a statement once the investigations are completed. "You can rest assured that there is no way in the world that I would approve or condone this kind of action," the Reflector quotes Kelly as saying. "I am waiting for the KBI and FBI to complete their investigation so we can know all the facts in the case." In a later statement, Hawkins called the governor's decision to wait an excuse to sidestep talking about what he considers an act of terror. And this is something that really struck home for a lot of state lawmakers and, maybe doesn't necessarily infringe on what's going to happen in Topeka next session, but definitely is going to be in the back of people's minds.
It's a sign of a toxic political culture. I've said this before. It's a tragedy, not just because it's an attack on our elected officials. It's an attack on our democratic system. And I'm deeply concerned about the trajectory of American democracy over the long haul and where we're going. We've had some crises moments in our democratic institutions. Our level of trust in our democratic institutions amongst the public is alarmingly low. And things like this, I think, are just symbolic of that. As to the comments made about Governor Kelly, it goes back to what we were talking about before, mostly just politics, I would say. It doesn't really determine policy one way or another. But I do think that the chief executive of the state, the Governor Kelly, in this respect, they're not just the head of an executive branch of government, they're also they have a symbolic role of leadership. And so there's a responsibility to speak to matters that are important to the state. And I'm sure that Governor Kelly is going to do that. I don't think that there's any real concern about that. It makes sense that Governor Kelly had said, wait for a KBI and FBI investigation to happen. I'm sure she's going to make a statement. And important statements, I think, do need to be made to the public that do we care about our democratic institutions? Do we care about our elected officials and the work that they do? I think that the low regard that the public has for the hard work that elected officials do is incongruent with reality, and it's unfortunate. So,
and I certainly agree with Jay's comment about the governor and her position on it, and I know she will eventually make that statement after gathering all of the information. And I do want to commend Minority Leader Dinah Sykes. She, as the assistant minority leader of the Kansas Senate, she did share that letter, and I commend her for that. I was even asked, did any Democrats receive the letter? There was actually one Democrat that received the letter. I won't mention the name, but there was one that received a letter. But I would certainly like to know, and I can't wait to find out, the source of how the letter was generated. So it's awful. No. It's awful.
And definitely something that has really hit home for a lot of lawmakers. And Ken, I don't know, were you one of those who got one of these letters? Are you talking with other folks who've gotten them?
Yeah, I was number 7 that contacted the director of TV with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation on that Friday. I normally don't get my mail, but I walked outside. I'm about the country. And so I got it. Thought, well, that's interesting. I thought I would tell my sheriff a couple hours later. I had work to do. And then all of a sudden the emails and everything else came. And so, my hat's off to the KBI, the agents, Highway Patrol, our local sheriff's department. Everybody took it very seriously. It was a very much a fluid process. I'll be honest, it was disappointing, that the governor is waiting for whatever. We've received letters from the KBI. We've received letters from the FBI. We know, and we can spend the rest of the time, but I'm not going to give any credit to any group. But if you want to know who got those letters, you can go back towards the end of the session and look at maybe a couple of votes that were taken. So it's unfortunate, as Dr. Simon said. What does this do to move things forward? Are you always going to be cautious now at a town hall, or when we're in Topeka and somebody you don't know or doesn't set an appointment to come see you? That's not the way I operate. I operate with full disclosure. People can call my cell phone, come to my house at any time and discuss anything. But with this, I mean, it looked like a legitimate letter. It was a legitimate address in my, the town I live close to of Agra. And so it was, but more importantly, two things. One, it's unnerving to families that don't have anything to do about it. We just talked about in that mayor's race. Leave families out of it. The second thing is the amount of money and manpower that was lost to take care of people because of this. That is what the frustrating part is. At $96,000 and all the manpower, you made a statement 6 weeks after the session. I have moved on. I do things in the summertime as well. So, if and don't be a cowardice. Approach people. If you've got issues, then approach us. But don't do it this way, because that hurts almost anything. We had this in Congress a few years ago when we had the sarin and other things being said, and basically shut down people being able to write their member of Congress. And so that's something like this. It's unfortunate. We're going to move on, but I don't know what it really served, if anything.
Yeah, just to echo what Representative Raja said, I've talked to a number of Republicans who said this is in no way going to change their vote, how they govern, what their vision is, or anything else. It doesn't accomplish anything, but it does, I think, it's symbolic of this erosion of our democratic institutions, our level of trust in them. And I know Representative Rajas, he works really hard to reach across the aisle and to find bipartisanship, echoing the comments that he had made before. We in Kansas, we have conservatives and we have progressives, but we also have an extraordinary long history of bipartisanship and working together to solve problems.
And I want to say this, the representative and I, we talk a lot in the Capitol, and I agree with the part of leave our families alone, the threats. I remember when I first joined the legislature as a single mom, I listed a P.O. box because initially I was getting people coming to my front door late at night and making threats to me, and it was scary, so I had to list my P.O. box. And but I agree with the representative that by no means will it deter us from doing our job.
All right. Well, last week, severe storms that included 85-mile-per-hour winds and baseball-sized hail hit Great Bend, Kansas. But the storm sirens never sounded. KAKE's Jocelyn Schifferdecker takes a look at why.
That receives our signal from dispatch. So dispatch will send out a signal to set off the sirens.
As straight-line winds of up to 85 miles per hour hit the city of Great Bend, law enforcement ordered the sirens to go off. When dispatch tried to send the signal, it failed. They tried again, and the same thing happened. They tried up to 10 times.
And identify some of the problems or where the problems occurred. We discovered that the fail-safes that were in place had also not allowed the sirens to go off.
This means the backups the city has in place malfunctioned. The city has 3 systems in total. The main structure went down when the storm hit because the power grid went out. When this happens, they have a backup system located in a metal box that sends the tower the signal, but the batteries weren't working. The last warning comes from a generator at the fire station powering the alert. However, after the power goes out, it takes a minute for the generator to turn on. The siren signal was sent in that window of time.
There had been multiple levels that would have had to have failed before that sirens wouldn't have sounded.
The batteries in the metal building have since been replaced, and Great Bend Fire Chief Brent Smith says they are looking to see if there's a faster way to power up the generator, doing everything they can to make sure this doesn't happen again.
It was just poor timing for everything.
And weather experts usually say that we shouldn't be relying on public sirens for our warnings. We should be using weather radios, the warnings on our phone from various apps like the KAKE weather app. But most Kansans, we do. It's kind of instinctive to us. And Ken, this was out in your area. these are vitally important in the minds of Kansans, even if not realistically.
Well, and I appreciate those, the comments, and I'm not going to say it was, the Great Bend. There's other situations just like that. I mean, it's unfortunate. Luckily, no lives were lost. But yes, we have weather radios, but sometimes the power is off at that transmitter site. We have technology. I would say that this is also a federal issue. We need to talk to our federal delegation, and we spent a lot of money. A lot of money came from the federal government to do a lot of different things, give money to a lot of different people. There was some of this that was invested in local infrastructure and things like this. I think this is probably something that we need to look at with new technologies. You know, especially in our area with tornadoes and severe weather now. Not everybody has those different technologies or wants to have a weather radio or whatever, and those sirens are there for protection. That they're still going to be. I don't see that going away. So I think that's something that we need to have a talk, maybe the governor and our federal delegation, and work with the Kansas Emergency Management folks. I mean, that's another thing, but that's a whole other story. But maybe they can maybe lead that charge on what it takes, so something tragic does not happen, because of, even with 3 backups, a siren doesn't go off, when it really needs to.
And we've certainly had a number of those across the state this year. I know in Sedgwick County we had sirens that went off when there wasn't a storm in their area not too long ago. And the same night as that Great Bend storm, we had several other storms where we were getting emails that sirens in various other counties weren't sounding, even though they were sending us pictures of funnel clouds coming out of the cloud banks. These are systems that date back to the 50s and 60s. They're aging at this point. A lot of them.
And I think, to echo Representative Raja's comment as well, this is maybe a very appropriate role for the federal government. Severe weather does not stop at state borders and is a national issue. And to have a nationally consolidated infrastructure available for emergency weather system and awareness sounds like an appropriate use of federal dollars. So, I think that this is certainly something to look at. And we've had a number of issues, as you said, that bring to light how alarming some of this outdated infrastructure is. We ultimately, as a political scientist, I'm always thinking about the relationship between the public and governance. We need a public who cares about these issues, and not just in Great Bend, but across the state, across the country, that look toward government to solve our public problems. And this is an appropriate use of government resources and money and time and efforts to solve these sorts of problems. We need a public who cares about this. And that's where a role like media has a role as well in that. And I wonder, I don't know what kind of media is available in Great Bend today, but I suspect, like so many other small towns across the country, media outlets are withering. There's not the local reporting and local journalism that there used to be, and therefore the public may be less informed about the importance of these issues than they used to be in the past. So it's an issue that connects to a whole bunch of national issues in terms of politics and media and the public.
Absolutely. And Pilar, I certainly agree with the representative, and this is one of those things that Democrats and Republicans would agree upon. So I certainly support his talking to the governor and others to address this issue on the federal level. However, I travel with Leadership Kansas, and so I traveled throughout the state of Kansas to the rural areas. And a lot of those rural Kansans, they rely on hearing that siren so that they can get to safety. It's definitely a life situation. They need that. I know that on July 7th or 8th here in Sedgwick County, here in Wichita, if you don't know, every day at noon, you will hear the siren letting you know that it's 12 noon. And it's so loud and it's always active. And so perhaps whoever is checking the batteries, they need to check them maybe every 3 days, a little more often, especially when you mention the aging process of some of our equipment. Sure.
Well, from plans to expand the Wyandotte Crosswinds Casino to approval of historical horse racing at the old Wichita Greyhound Park, recent expansions in gambling opportunities could change the look and feel of Park City. KSN's Melly Jones takes a look at the impact of just one of the coming changes.
The new home to 1,000 historic horse racing machines.
You have a large building on almost 80 acres up in Park City. It's a 3-story building. The bones of the building are in great shape, but obviously it hasn't been in use for a decade and a half.
In addition to the machines, there will be a Gillies dance hall and dining inside and a new hotel. The facility adds another piece of economic development for the Park City area.
We hope they'll come here and dine in our restaurants and stay in our hotels and spend time here. And we hope as the Star Bond project progresses that we'll have an aquarium, more hotels, we have ball facilities. There's a lot of things in the pipeline.
Across the road, Crosswinds Casino, operated by the Wyandotte tribe, planning to expand its operation. It's worked with the federal government for a large-scale expansion to include gaming tables and a convention center.
They're not really in competition. We see them as complementing each other's businesses.
The Ruffin plan will create more than 400 jobs in Park City.
Just the other economic output that will be created based on those types of salaries and that type of revenue and the number of visitors that it's going to bring to Park City.
The continual growth, the mayor says, creates opportunities for residents to live and stay in Park City.
And lots of change there, lots of different things coming. One thing I've noticed as we look at the bigger picture, though, is over the last decade or so, you've really seen a change in attitude toward gambling opportunities like this among Kansans.
Yeah, I mean, gambling has become far more culturally acceptable now than it was even 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And so, you know, I think that opens up certain economic opportunities, broadly speaking, but also some policy challenges and other things. So, you know, it's something interesting to look at. It's certainly going to be good for the economic development of the North Wichita area, and that's good to see. It's good to see that kind of revitalization take place, and it coincides with a very profitable and growing industry in gambling. So.
Hey, mentioning policy issues and such, you're on the Fed and State Committee and the Senate, Aletha, and you've dealt with several of these.
Yes, I've voted to support this, and I'm excited. It is certainly going to boost our economy. It's going to create jobs. I mean, I was there during the time that the Greyhound Park closed, and my district voted in support of keeping it open. So many of the people I knew lost their jobs, and so to hear that it's going to create jobs, it's going to create entertainment, something else for us to do, I am just excited and looking forward to going out there and dropping a quarter in.
And we're going to have to end it on that upbeat note. I apologize, Kim, but we are out of time. Thank you again, all three, Aletha, Jay, and Ken, for joining us this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, KSN News, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue the discussion with you online. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads. For now, stay safe and have a great week.